What is going on? We are live today. Everyone's talking points when they come to me usually revolves around one of two things. Should I buy, or how do I actually renew my lease so the price doesn't go up, my landlord doesn't come back to me, he doesn't show my apartment, and I don't want to look for another apartment. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to the hot topic of today, this week, this month, which is how do I actually sign my lease without actually jumping and or come back to them at a more realistic number. Listen, where we're coming from is that we just throughout New York City represent about 15 to 20 homes. And every single year that lease renewal comes up and I talk with the owner, whether it's the owner of the building, the owner of the home, and there's a tenant in there already. They love the tenant, they're paying on time. So long as they're paying on time, I do have a call with someone who it's a little bit different. He broke the toilet, had to spend $600 on something else, so that might not be a lease renewal. However, for the ones that are lease renewals, this is on the landlord side. So obviously when you go into negotiations, you have to understand where they're coming from, where you're coming from, so you understand each other's talking points. With the landlord, this is what's most important, is that the landlord wants a tenant that pays on time and doesn't cause any problems. Okay, they're willing to sacrifice a certain amount of money to make that happen, though I do have a client that is very stringent on the price, very stringent on very high prices, so it kind of stretches our ability to sell a home, the lifestyle, and the experience, and we've done a good job. I don't want to pat myself on the back, even though I just did, but essentially the number one thing with a landlord is not only do you pay on time and you're not causing any problems, but when you go to them with an issue, how do you handle it? Is it a screaming nightmare, or are you saying, listen, my toilet doesn't stop, you know, or there's stop flushing, or there's a little bit of a drip? And they love those tenants. So anytime that a lease renewal comes up and I'm representing the landlord, and like I said, we have about 15 or 20 properties like this, is that the landlord says, they've been paying on time, you haven't got any calls. I said no. They said, okay, great, let's renew the lease, and then we discuss the price. And it all depends on the market. And we discuss it and we say, listen, the marketplace is in favor of the renters, they can easily find something, or it's in favor of you, the landlord. Let's just go at $100 or $150, depending on the price of the home, and we'll see what they say. And most of the time they take it. However, a lot of the times they don't, okay? But their talking points aren't that very good. As I say that, their talking points aren't that good. And this is the thing is, if they're good, we'll agree with them. But if they're bad, I'll go to the owner and say, hey, listen, they came back. I think they're not willing to, or they're willing to stay. They just had really bad talking points, and essentially, let's call their bluff, okay? And then we go back to them and say, listen, the owner is stringent on this price, and most of the time they agree to it. I don't think we've actually had someone move out because of a lease renewal. We've had them move out because they've moved, but we've never had them come back to us and be like, listen, we're moving, and then they move. All right, so these are the talking points. So that's obviously the preface to, we're gonna be discussing this from the renter side, not from the landlord side, because those are most of the questions that I get. So number one is, you have to, and typically this is over email. I cannot stress it enough. This has to be over a call. You have to call them and say, is there a way to talk to the building manager? Great, here's my number, when can they call me back? It's about the lease renewal, and then you have this bullet pointed. So number one is, instead of emailing, because there's no interaction. It's like people that text or email instead of calling me about negotiations or a problem with the deal. Like, I have to understand where we're coming from. I want to know your position. Like, I think I made my point. Call the person instead of email. If it's only email, here are the talking points that you want to bring up. Number one is, you have to be prepared if you go on the phone call. You have to be, you can't just say one of these, which is, I've been a wonderful tenant. Okay, great. I have thousands of wonderful tenants. How are you different? How is your lease renewal different than, say, 5D, which is right next to you? You're 5C, they're 5D. All right. So number one is bring up that you've been a great tenant. Okay. You haven't caused any issues. There's no noise disturbance. You're not smoking pot. You're not partying. You're not slamming your door. You don't have a barking dog. Your kid isn't rolling through the hallway and throwing things against other doors. And trust me, I'm not making this up. I've heard all of those. So that's why you have to bullet point, because what's going to happen is when the landlord looks at this, they're going to say, oh, that's actually a really good point. I have a problem in another building of a dog barking. Or that's actually a really good point. This family is extremely loud because the kid plays piano or he practices his saxophone section in the apartment instead of at school. So number one is bring up that you're a wonderful tenant, no issues, no complaints. Number two is that you've paid on time. Very, very, very important, because even with one late payment, they ding it against you. It's kind of like credit, okay? When you do have one late payment, they're like, I don't know. It was late. It was last year. Not a big deal. They've paid on time other than that. But if you are going to be late with a payment because a check didn't clear or you're out of the country or for whatever the reason is, say, hey, listen, this month, because you're giving them the heads up. Okay, you want to be proactive. You're literally leading your residency for the lease renewal if you know you're going to be staying in the building and or the home, okay? Or with that management company. You could trade within the buildings. All right, so you paid on time. The third thing, which you have to say, is I've been looking. I've been looking at other homes. I've been looking at other studios. I've been looking at other one bedrooms. I've been looking at places outside of this building, outside of where you actually have your homes, okay? That always works. People don't like to hear that. On the listing side, you don't want to hear a buyer that says, listen, I know I have an offer in here, but I also saw this one place that's on Street Easy. Or as a tenant, when you say that, you say, listen, I went to visit a couple of homes, or I've been on Street Easy, there's 47 homes available in my area. That's a lot of competition. And that's actually one of the talking points I'm gonna have with a home that we're putting on the market right now is there's literally 47. There's 47 homes that would be competitors. So there either needs to be 47 buyers for each of those homes, or the buyer that comes through our home, ours needs to be priced competitively compared to everything else. Number four, you have to look at the market. Look at the market. Go to Street Easy, go to Curved, go to, it doesn't really matter. The New York Times, the Post, New York Newsday, wherever they have a real estate section. Or just go to Google and just say rent pricing or rent market report, market update. And we don't do a market update for rentals. It's tied in with the sales. However, you have to bring up only the things that are in your favor. You have to bring up only the numbers that say it's gone down, there's a lot of inventory, issues upcoming. Whatever makes your position look good is the way that you need to present it, okay? And quote the article and have the link right there in the email so they can click on it and say, wow, you're right. That's exactly what I did. Even when the rent was going through the roof, I would quote just that one article that someone took a number and somehow spun it that it looked like there was a lot of inventory, even though there was, for almost 5 years, management companies had below 1% vacancy, which is insane if you're talking about thousands of units, okay? You want to have as high occupancy as you can, okay? So you have to talk about market numbers that are in your favor. And the last thing, this is something that you want to, it's known as future selling. So in other words, when I show a home, I say, where would your dining room table, where would your living room table, how would you entertain, where would your kids play, where would you blah, 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 things like that, okay? So when you talk about that, the buyer looks around the home and they say, oh, actually, I can see myself here. You want to do the opposite with the landlord. The landlord doesn't like, as I just mentioned, any vacancy, okay? They want everything occupied, all right? So when you're doing that and you're saying, actually, I'm gonna be here, wait for it, for a number of years, or I'm gonna be here for a while, I'm gonna be here for the foreseeable future, I'm going to continue, going back to point one, point two, is I'm gonna continue being a great tenant, because this is what you just did. You said, This is why you're great. This is the issues, which is the market and that you've been looking, and this is why you should renew. Okay, this is perfect selling. This is selling 101. All right, so when you say, I'm going to continue being here for a number of years, paying on time as a great tenant, this is why I agree with a $75 increase or a $50 increase, or I went back and I said no increase, and guess what? Your boy got it. I rent downtown, and sure enough, they came back, they said, all right, sure. I was like, not even a counter offer? Okay, cool. I don't know. I like the building and everything else. However, if you do this, you almost have an airtight case for them to renew you because they love you as a tenant, you're paying on time, you're great. And by the way, don't bring up any of these things if it's a lie, okay? Don't bring up, if you're not a good tenant but you pay on time and it's a bad market, don't bring up you're a bad tenant because they're like, well, actually, you're causing a lot of problems, you're complaining about everything, blah, 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 okay? So you can then compare your rent, what you're paying, to someone else's rent, okay? So hopefully this helped. This is exactly what I use when I go in for a lease renewal. I hope you use the same thing. So just to go over it, you want to talk about why you're great. And right now, I paid on time, I'm a great tenant, I never don't have any noise or kids running around or practicing instruments. Number two, to $3 million. Go to our blog, which is incredible. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on that. BPI.live. Have an amazing day. It looks like it's going to be raining, but it looks beautiful for the rest of the days. Any questions? I look forward to coming back again in the future. Talk to you guys soon.